All right. Notre Dame fans, welcome back to the Irish Breakdown podcast. My name is Brian Driscoll. I'm the publisher at irishbreakdown.com, joined by my guy, Ryan Roberts, our recruiting director. And we're going to talk recruiting today, Ryan, obviously, because it is the Monday recruiting hour. And so we're going to do a couple of these this week. We're going to have a few shows about recruiting. And today's show is going to focus on, as we kind of sadly finally wrap up the 2021 season, because I don't watch the NFL until there's no more college football to watch, and then I begrudgingly watch the NFL, and now there's not even that to watch. So we are officially into the offseason, and Notre Dame is pretty close to having its coaching staff figured out. We should get some word here in a few on that final piece, but it's kind of in that position where it's time to really dive headfirst into recruiting Notre Dame. And the reason we say that is because for a while there, it's kind of like, okay, this is who's on the board now, but is that going to change when these new coaches arrive? Right. Well, I think with Marcus Freeman being the head coach, the defensive board's not going to change a whole lot when the new D coordinator came. It's really about let's get the offensive class or offensive staff together. That is now together. And we're going to start today by looking at the offensive class from a big picture standpoint, beginning with what are the needs in this class, Ryan? And I think that's always, as a coach, that's the first thing you have to establish. As we get on the road, what are we looking for? What are we going out there to get?
Right. No, and it's a lot of great points there. And like you said, with Coach McCullough, new tight end coach, Harry Heastand coming back into the picture for Notre Dame, and then the everything surrounding new, running, replace a lot of position coaches, obviously, on the offensive side of the football. So it's exciting to see how those boards do shake out, because I know for a long time we were talking about this offensive line board, right? And we're like, well, that could change completely with Coach Easton and seeing, kind of who he wants. So it's going to be an interesting conversation. And we know, the other big layer is that, defensive recruiting is off to a very hot start in 2023. Offense needs to catch up, quote unquote, a little bit, and it's going to be a paramount class for a few different positions. So it's going to be definitely, I don't want to call it a new era, because obviously Tommy Rees is still the offensive coordinator like he has been, but we have obviously a lot of new parts, a part of the machine on that side of the ball.
I think you can go there, Ryan. I do think you can go there, because I still believe that, and I think the fact that Tommy Rees talks so much about autonomy and wanting autonomy speaks to the fact that he didn't feel he had it before. And I think in a lot of ways, Brian Kelly was still sort of driving the bus on who was going to be on staff, how the offense was going to look, who they were going to recruit for, what kind of players they were going to look for.
Right.
And now Tommy Rees gets to kind of drive that bus a little bit, right? Like, Marcus Freeman's handed him the map, but now Tommy Rees gets to drive the bus. Whereas before, Brian Kelly handed him the map, got in the bus and said, I know where I'm going. You just hang back there and check out that map I gave you, right? And then, you go do what I want to do. So I do think we can say it's a new era. Plus the fact that, look, position coaches are always going to have their own likes and dislikes. And any good coordinator, and Tommy Rees, I think, did this with the previous staff, is he's going to give them some leeway to say, hey, look, I may like this guy better, but if you want to stand on the table and pound for that guy, then we'll go get that guy.
Right.
And I think now it's so there's going to be some of that. There's going to be some coaches that bring some different likes and dislikes. Deland McCullough is going to be different than Lance Taylor. Jared Parker is going to be different than John McNulty. I pray to God that Chancey Stuckey's different than Till Alexander. And, so we're going to see what it's going to look like. And so I do think it's fair to say it's a new era. And when you look at the class, I mean, you have to look and say, okay, well, what are the needs we have? What are the numbers that we have, right? That we have to meet in this class. And that's what we're going to sort of discuss today. And then we'll give you all some early names to know, some guys that we like that are on the board. And we'll dive more into that here as we start to do sort of some shows where we're going to kind of break down the receiver boards. That'll be sort of what we do on the Wednesday nights. We'll start diving into the film of some of the top players on the board. And, this will the who will be more of the focal points of future shows. Today, we want to kind of lay a big picture outlook on it. And before we dive too much into the offense, one thing that I've gathered talking from multiple sources around Notre Dame, and then kind of taking what they're telling me and then looking at the numbers to see if what they're telling me makes sense. It makes a lot of sense. This is they anticipate this being a big class. I've heard 25 plus is what I've been told. And if you look at the roster right now, there's 28 seniors, fifth years, and sixth years on the roster right now. Now,
Yeah.
some of those guys you're going to want to bring back, right? Like there's going to be some fifth years you want to bring back next year, things along those lines. But they're anticipating this being a really big class. And so that means two things. Number one, obviously you need to land impact players. But number two, it means there are going to be some positions you can maybe go a little over than you maybe thought. But the problem is there's also some positions where you need numbers. And so you have to think about that, because if you're going to take an extra player at this position, that means you're going to have to take away from an extra position somewhere else, right? A player at another position. And that's why really establishing the board and the need is priority number one. So priority number one on offense when it comes to establishing your board, Ryan, is quarterback. And, I think from a need standpoint, this is where the conversation could get really interesting. But to begin, the more important than need, the number need in this class, they need an impact player. I mean, they need a top level dude at quarterback in this class.
Yeah, no. And again, I know for everybody that listens to the recruiting show, we're just going to keep hammering the same point over and over again, but everybody knows how important the quarterback position is just in general, in football sense and in sports sense. It's the most important position in all of sports. And it's the most important position for recruiting classes, because that is the leader, right? That is the face. That is the symbol of what can be and what we think could be for Notre Dame, a dynamic 2023 class. And it starts with Dante Moore, quarterback out of Martin Luther King Jr. in Detroit, Michigan. He is a guy that we keep talking about, 2.5 hours away. That these guys don't show up all the time in, not quite in your backyard, but pretty close to being in your backyard, right? Like this is a short drive away from South Bend, Indiana. So this is the kid that represents a 5-star player that can be a program-changing player. Right. We always talk about the Deshaun Watsons of the world that really got it flipped in the right direction for Clemson, right? And this is the guy. And there's going to be other guys on the board that we want to talk about, of course. Christopher Vazina out of Alabama, and there's Jackson Arnold, who is now committed to Oklahoma out of Texas, but we still think that Notre Dame would be in that conversation if they did not land at Dante Moore. There's Avery Johnson out of Kansas, who's a nice, talented, athletic quarterback. I mean, there's guys, man. There's going to be guys.
It's a deep, deep class of quarterback.
For sure.
But there just aren't a lot of Dante Moores. And
exactly.
I only saw him tweet one thing this weekend. And that one tweet was him putting out his GPA from the last semester. 4.0.
That's awesome, man. That's awesome.
I mean, and hashtag student athlete is what he put. You know what I mean? Like, you guys want to know why we keep talking about how much of a fit he is? It's stuff like that. I mean, you talk to Dante one time and you're like, this kid's different, right? Like, this kid's a little different. Like, he's not your typical junior in high school young man. He's not your typical 5-star quarterback that, comes with a little bit of baggage, personality baggage. This is a kid that I think you really look at and say, talk about what the it factor is. When you talk about the it factor quarterback and you say, I can't describe it, but I know it when I see it. Well, I think we can somewhat describe it to a degree. And the things you talk about when you look at the it factor, you want a young man that's mature. You want a young man that's hardworking. You want a young man that's got leadership qualities. You want someone who understands the importance of valuing how he's perceived, knowing that how the quarterback is perceived is going to impact the entire organization. And Dante shows the level of maturity just in the times we've talked to him that, I think he understands all those things. Even comments he made one time recently, Ryan, where, it was like a couple months ago where people are asking about when he's going to make a decision. And he goes on this answer that talks about how he has to combine, making the right decision for him with the understanding of knowing that as the quarterback, he's got to figure things out, so he can be, just that level of maturity these shows when you talk about the it factor, it's not just that Dante can spin it and that he's athletic and, and he produces big numbers. That's all fine and dandy. There are I wouldn't say plenty. There are several quarterbacks that I would say have the physical tools that Dante has. What makes Dante different is that he combines those physical tools with some really special stuff in here and in here. And I think that's what makes him so different for Notre Dame, because I don't think all 5-stars could thrive at Notre Dame. It's a different animal, man. And I think and the part of the reason that I'm so high on Dante is I think he has all the on and off field traits needed to not just be productive at Notre Dame, but to thrive at Notre Dame, which you and I both know goes a lot further than just what you do on Saturday afternoons and evenings during the fall. It goes a lot further than that.
Yeah, and obviously we're going to talk heavy about that Notre Dame layer, but I'm going to take us real quick to like an NFL draft perspective for a second, because that's where, you know, my bread and butter has always been, right? When you evaluate the quarterback position, it goes so much deeper than the physical traits. The mental side, the leadership qualities, those things are in many cases make or break, and especially at a place like Notre Dame, where, I mean, if being a student athlete and juggling your studies with playing football wasn't difficult enough at the college level, doing it at a level of Notre Dame with the academics that they provide as a institution, while still playing high quality football that is playing a national schedule, right? We're traveling. There's a lot of daunting tasks, 5 a.m. wake ups for workouts. So Coach Bayless, like, it is a daunting thing. And just a football player in general at Notre Dame, it takes a special person, man. Mm-hmm. It really does. It takes a special person. And I believe wholeheartedly, not only is Dante Moore a 5-star talent, I think that he is that type of difference that we need, because we have seen good quarterback play at Notre Dame. It's been good. There's been good quarterback play, but we need difference, something that turns it to a different level.
A guy that can put a team on his shoulders and lead them beyond just set. And again, I think this is what is often missed in when we have the conversation about Malik Zaire. And what separated him from Deshaun Kaiser, and why I've always said they made a mistake going with Deshaun Kaiser over Malik Zaire, is because if we're just going to talk about physical tools and NFL projection, there's no debate. It's Deshaun Kaiser, right? But Deshaun didn't have a lot of those other things that Malik had.
Right.
And that's why when it was Malik's team through an entire offseason, that 2015 team had such a different personality than other teams. Where Everett Golson didn't really have that type of leadership ability. I mean, the only quarterback they had really during Everett's time was that had that leadership was Tommy Rees. Well, he's the backup, right? I mean, it's going to be different. And, Malik had that, right? And that's what made Malik a little different. And it's like, why do players like Drew Lock and Deshaun Kaiser and Geno Smith go from projected top 15 picks to second round? It's not because they measured how far they could throw it or their miles per hour or their spin rate and all that other kind of stuff. It's because those three guys had some question marks on some of the other things that went into quarterback, and not all attitude. It's just sometimes it's accuracy. Sometimes it's how does he pick up a defense? How does he process information? But it's just not all about your spin rate and your 40 time, right? And that's the point we're getting to, and that's what makes Dante unique. And as far as where they are right now, I mean, they're in a position, they're in a good position, and we'll continue to say that until he makes his decision. I feel Notre Dame has put themselves in a good position. There's more that needs to be done because he's not committed yet. And there's other programs getting in the mix. LSU's trying to make a push. Miami's trying to make a push. I think Notre Dame's going to be the one constant. The interesting thing about this conversation is, Ryan, is I don't necessarily see a need for a second quarterback right now, because I don't think they can afford to bring in a second quarterback, simply because Ron Paul III is still on scholarship. And you start getting into where you're now going to be, Pine, Buckner, Angeli, Powlus, and Moore, or whoever the 2023 quarterback is. That's 5 guys that all have eligibility beyond 2023. And even if you lose Pine, you're still at 4. And I don't know if a 5th quarterback is really the place to go when you have so many other needs and other positions. If for some reason a quarterback slot opens up, I could see Notre Dame making a late move for a second quarterback, as long as it's done the right way, which means you call up Dante Moore and explain to him, what that need is. But that second quarterback to me would be more of an Avery Johnson type, a guy, or a project type of guy. A guy like there's a kid that's on the board. I think it's like Marcus Stokes, I think is his last name.
Yeah.
When you look at him and you're like, yeah, this is a kid that's got some things that you can work with, but he's going to need some time.
Right.
And when you look at a Dante Moore, he's a kid that can show up and be ready to play day one. if he's as good as we think he is, he may only be a 3-year guy. He may sit for a year behind Tyler Buckner, and then Tyler leaves and Dante takes over, and Dante starts 2 years and he's out of here, which is a Bryce Young type of thing, and we've seen that from other quarterbacks as well. So, and there's merit to having a projectable kid in this class because the numbers may get there, and there may be some transfers or some injuries or things. But right now, I think one has to be the target right now. And I think if you could get to a point where a second is needed, but I think that's going to be a down the road thing. And I think it's more of a projectable kid or a player like an Avery Johnson that could play multiple positions potentially. I mean, there's no reason to think that if Avery Johnson can't stick a quarterback, I mean, he's athletic enough to say, hey, let's go try out a receiver. Let's throw you some balls. I mean, kid's really athletic.
Yeah.
So I think it'd have to be that kind of guy.
Yeah. And I think the one, and I don't know if you agree with this, Brian, but I think that the one thing about Dante Moore is I don't think that he would be overly, I don't know what the word is, but I don't think he would be conflicted with if they came to him and said, we're going to take a second quarterback just off of depth.
Yeah.
Like, I don't think he would be threatened.
Most kids would be fine with that if you explain it to them beforehand.
Right.
And I, especially because you're not going to land Dante Moore and Arch Manning or Dante Moore and Malachi Nelson, or it's not going to be that kind of quarterback class. It's going to be like Tua and Mac Jones in the same class. I mean, think about that. They had the two top 15 picks in the same class, right? Well, one was a 5-star and the other one was some 3-star kid. It was just considered sort of a depth piece, right? And that depth piece ended up developing, but Mac Jones was always a guy that needed more time, where Tua was more able to kind of step up and help out right away. So, I think that would be the key there, in my opinion. And now that leads to, Ryan, the next topic of conversation, which is wide receiver. The wide receiver class is interesting because this is one of those positions in this class where you need numbers and you need depth of impact players. You can't just bring in a bunch of solid, decent players with some upside, but you have to bring in some guys that can come in and help you right away. Because you look at this depth chart, the odds are good that you're going to lose Joe Wilkins, you're going to lose
Braden Lenzy, Avery Davis,
Joe Wilkins. If some of the guys that we like on the team are what we think they can be, maybe Lorenzo Styles isn't a 4-year player, right? I mean, you always have to prepare for that. If a guy is an elite player, more often than not, what you have to prepare yourself for if you're a Notre Dame fan is, as you up your recruiting and you up your coaching, there's things you have to deal with. We've already talked about. You have to deal with the fact that teams aren't going to stop recruiting your players when you get studs. The other thing is you're going to start seeing more Kyle Hamiltons and Kyron Williams, meaning guys that are 3-year players. That's a good thing as long as those guys are getting drafted high, right? Like, it means you're producing impact players. It means they had big-time talent, which is going to lead to you getting more players like that. But you have to recruit a little bit different when, because like Notre Dame in 2020, their starting receivers were a couple fifth-year guys. Ideally, you don't want to have 2 fifth-year starting receivers if you're playing in the college football playoff. I mean, it's just not the ideal situation to be in, and that's kind of where I'm coming from. So I think this is a class where numbers are important. I think you need minimum, like 3 is the bare minimum, and I think 4 is closer to the target for me in this class from a number standpoint, because there's 8 guys on the scholarship right now, including Matt Salerno. He's also going to be out after this year. So, I mean, going into 2023, as of right now, you're going to have Tobias Merriweather in last year's class. You're going to have Lorenzo Styles, Deion Colsey, and Jaden Thomas. So, unless they move Xavier Watts, which I'd all be for, right as of right now, they haven't. That's 4 guys on your entire roster at wide receiver going into 2023. So, like, to me, even if you move Xavier Watts, you still need at least 3, because 3 gets you back to 8. Which we've said, I mean, 9 to 10 is closer to where you need to be numbers-wise at wide receiver. The danger, however, Ryan, is if you bring in too many kids in one class, then you're back to square one a year later because you've lost a couple kids to the transfer portal. Right. And that's what makes this a little tricky. So 3 is the minimum. 4, to me, is the target number. I've thrown that number out to some people, and they haven't pushed back on it at all.
Gotcha.
So it sounds like that's kind of that they would. There's a group of 4 that I think they see as, yeah, we'd like to get that group, in my opinion, from a number standpoint.
Yep. And I think that it's really important, obviously, is I mean, like you said, in the age of the transfer portal now, like the numbers can fluctuate so quickly. And we already know that Notre Dame is going to lose several key contributors, like you said, like Wilkins and Davis and Braden Lindsay after the season. So you need to replenish this depth chart at wide receiver, and you need to do it with a lot of talent. And you need to also make sure, and it's awesome if you can hit on some wide receivers where like they can play multiple spots on the offense and they have that type of talent where they're not just a one trick kind of guy, right? Like just strictly a Z or strictly a slot or whatever. Like it's nice if you have guys that have alignment versatility. Right. But also, if you can't get those guys, because there's not a ton of those guys, that's kind of rare to find guys that can fit into, every single wide receiver position potentially. But getting guys that can fit together is a huge thing for me, right? Like we don't want the same type of style. I feel like for a couple years there, we just had skyscrapers outside where it's not a ton of separation. They're winning on the vertical third of the field, and that's fine for the role. But we need some quick separators. We need some guys that can hit some home runs from time to time and create separation that way. Some route runners. Like we need players from Notre Dame that have necessary skill sets, I think, that can really work well together. So that's when you ask, what is the ideal wide receiver board for Notre Dame? I think it's finding 4 guys that skill sets can maybe be interchangeable to a degree, but also make sure that they're not similar enough where they can't play together potentially.
Right, that's so important, Ryan, and it's been as you've watched the show from time to time before you came on. That's been something I've been hammering on for years. I have no problem having Chase Claypool and Miles Boykin on the same roster, but you can't have a roster filled with just those guys and then let's throw in a Chris Fink, right? Like you need a diversity of skill set, and if you're going to err on the side of too much of one thing, err on the side of really athletic players like Bama has had. They haven't had any big receivers the last couple of years. But they got dudes that can flat out run and can run routes and catch the football and get open. And so there's a need for more of those type of players. We talked about it last year. I mean, you went through a 3-year stretch of recruiting to where now when you look at the roster, there's one guy like that on the roster right now. It's Lorenzo Styles. In 3 classes, there's one guy like that. And look, had they not lost receivers in the 2022 class, the answer still be the same. Because CJ Williams, he's more of a possession volume kind of guy, not a throw him a ball and let him go do some stuff, and that's what I think they're missing is having that unique blend. So if you look at today at irishbreakdown.com, I wrote an article about sort of the must gets in the offensive class, and I talked about obviously Dante Moore was number 1, number 2 is Carnell Tate. Number 3 is you need an explosive playmaker, a Rodney Gallagher or a Jaylen Brown. I mean, perfect world, you get 2 of them, but let's be realistic here. It's going to be tough enough to get one of them, much less both of them.
Right.
And then, I like a longer stretch the field type of guy. I did make a caveat in there because Jaden Greathouse doesn't necessarily fit that bill because he's like 6'1" to 6'2", but he's really long. And he plays like that kind of guy. Like he plays differently than Carnell Tate.
Sure.
So he would fit that same mold, even though he's not the 6'3" to 6'5" guy like a Malik Elzy or a Tyler Williams or a Braylon James, Kyle Casper type of guy.
Kyle Casper. Yeah.
Right. So that's why I look at Jaden and I put him in that category because if you theoretically had Carnell Tate, either Rodney Gallagher or Jaylen Brown and Jaden Greathouse in the same class, just making a point, you've got 3 completely different players.
Oh, absolutely.
But also 3 players that can play multiple spots. I think Carnell can play all 3 receiver spots.
Yeah.
I think he could be an X because I think he can stretch the field and run routes. I think he's got really good ball skills. He's going to get a lot stronger as he gets to college, which would allow him to play the boundary much. I mean, he's a bigger version of Chris Brown in a lot of ways. Chris Brown played the boundary for what many people believe to have been the best Notre Dame team of the last 15 years, right? Sure. The 2015 team. Certainly one of the best offenses. So you can adjust. I mean, he's not going to look a whole lot different than Kevin Austin when it's all said and done, in my opinion, like size-wise. Right. Like he may not get to 215, but he'll be 205 when it's all said and done. but he can play X. And I think Carnell, too, could move into the slot and do for Notre Dame what they were recruiting C.J. Williams to do, which is 3rd and 5, we're putting you in the slot and we're going to have you win on whoever they line up against you, that kind of thing. So he can play all over. Rodney Gallagher can play slot or X. Jaylen Brown can play slot or X. And in some instances, Jaylen Brown could go play W. I mean, he's bigger than what Devontae Smith was coming out of high school and a very similar type of athlete to Devontae Smith. And then, of course, Braylon James could play X or W. And then, a guy like a Tyler Williams can play X or W. I mean, there's all types of different skill sets. Jaden Greathouse is more of a W, which would then put Carnell Tate to X, which is ultimately where I think his best position would even be there, but some kind of combination of those things would be ideal for me.
Yeah.
And there is unlike last year, there's a big gap between what this guy brings to the table and what the other guys bring to the table when you look at the receiver board, Ryan.
Yeah, no, and it's really interesting because the one thing I wanted to add into just your thought process is I think a lot of people, if say Notre Dame did land Carnell Tate and a Jaden Greathouse, for instance, right? Those guys are both, 6'2" with good length, like you're saying. And I think some people would just kind of say stylistically they're probably similar, and they're not. I think that the key there is that Carnell Tate has that alignment versatility where he can play multiple spots. Jaden is a physical dude who probably projects best to the boundary, right? In an ideal world.
Who?
But you're a Greathouse.
Yes.
Yep.
I thought you said Jalen for a second. I was like,
no, not Jaylen Brown. No. Not putting that speed out there. No. Jaden Greathouse, we're going to throw it to the boundary.
Oh, yeah.
Carnell Tate could play multiple spots all over the place. Jaylen Brown's that speedster down in Miami. That is talk about taking the top of the defense. 600 meter guy. He is dynamic, and he's also 6'1". So he's not a 6'1". He's not a small kid either. Rodney Gallagher, high school quarterback for his team out in Pennsylvania, and he is a cat quick, physical, after catch type of wide receiver. That's what he projects to at the next level because you see him run the football now for his high school, and he is breaking tackles left and right. He has great spatial awareness. Tyler Williams, like you said, has length. Braylon James, yes, very smooth. Tyler Williams, Braylon James, I think of more of a springy athlete. He's got that 6'3". Kyle Casper is just a skyscraper, 6'5". Long arms, win above the rim. So there is all different body types. There's all different styles, which I think makes it really exciting. And there's going to be an ideal class again where I'm like, in the perfect world for Notre Dame, these 4 guys are the ones, but there is options here. And we didn't even mention Ronan Hannafin, who Notre Dame is very high on as a potential boundary wide receiver. Think of
you're right. Yeah. Defensive guy, right.
Or a defensive guy. But think about like an Alec Pierce, again, from Cincinnati. That's stylistically what he looks like at 6'3", 205 with plus speed. So there's a lot of options and there's a lot of names. And I think it's exciting. And I know some people are scared of it, right? Because right now Notre Dame only has 2 offensive recruits in the 2023 class. And it's, oh my God, can we catch up here? But I think it's exciting for the fact that for a sense to be adverse here in a second.
Right.
A new coaching staff pretty much on the offensive side of the football outside of Tommy Rees, right? You're bringing in new guys, new perspectives, and it's almost like a clean slate. Let's see how this is built. I think it's kind of exciting, really, when you think about it.
And the board's going to expand. I mean, there's going to be kids they're able to invite and get on campus this summer, and there's going to be kids that, especially if they kind of go out in the fall, there usually tends to be a lot of uncommitted receivers during the season. I mean, that's just where maybe you're not in on a kid. And all of a sudden you go out there and you start throwing the ball like we think they're going to throw the ball this year. And all of a sudden, bam, things change. And now all of a sudden maybe a Braylon James sees that and Notre Dame's throwing for 280 to 300 yards a game. And he's now, oh, you know what? Hey, maybe I should go make a visit to Notre Dame, right? We see that kind of thing all the time. Braylon James is an interesting kid because he reminds him and Tyler Williams to me, but especially Braylon James. You talk about springy. He reminds me of the movement that started like 15, 20 years ago where high school football coaches just started recruiting. You're not supposed to recruit players from other teams,
basketball players.
So they just started recruiting basketball players, right?
Or high jumpers.
Exactly. And you go find that 6'3" guard, that maybe doesn't have a handle or can't shoot, but he's real springy. And you say, hey, man, come out and play football, right? And then that kind of started in a movement where now these kids, maybe, basketball is not my future, but I can go play football. And and do something. And I think that's to me is what, like, Braylon James is that kind of guy. I love kids like that. Like, that's what I loved about Chase Claypool. I mean, Chase Claypool was a better basketball player in high school than he was a football player. The kid scored 40 points a game as a senior in basketball. He was a super raw football player, but he was super big and super long and super springy. And I think that's kind of the, what I like about Braylon James. And now the interesting about him is he's a guy that, and same with Jaden Greathouse, those are two guys from Texas that Chancey Stuckey has actually been recruiting longer than anybody else on the Notre Dame board, because he was recruiting them at Baylor.
Well, I was going to say Greathouse, his first offer was from Baylor, and Coach Stuckey was not on the staff when that offer went out, because that was all the way back in 2020. Like, they were on Greathouse early for Baylor, but like you said, two guys that were on the Baylor board that Coach Stuckey has relationships with. When I talked to Jaden, he told me, like, I have a great relationship with Coach Stuckey. We don't even talk much about football. We talk about, just everyday life and what's going on in each other's worlds and stuff. So it's a great point. And Baylor just specifically has had that relationship with him for a long time, because he was the first offer for Jaden, and Coach Stuckey just kind of went in and said, yep, that's a great football player. And the contacts have continued since he's gone to Notre Dame.
Right. So I think a 3 minimum, I think you can get to 4. 4 could potentially be a Ronan Hannafin who could play another position. It could be a slot guy that maybe could play some running back. I mean, it could be a bigger bodied guy that maybe they discover down the road that maybe could grow into a tight end at some point in time. I mean, or it could just be a receiver. I mean, there's all types of things you can do with that. When you bring in 4 receivers in a class, it is kind of nice if one of them maybe has a chance, instead of, hey, you're the 4th guy. Sorry. If one of those guys does have some potential to play somewhere else, if that opportunity doesn't arise. So who that would be, I don't know. And we didn't even mention like Rico Flores. I mean, I'm looking at our list. There's some guys. We didn't even mention Rico Flores, who's talked about visiting this spring and summer. He's a really good top 100 caliber football player. We didn't talk about Noah Rogers from North Carolina, who Notre Dame is talking to, but not quite pushing for yet. Caden Lee, who there's a chance that they offer him at some point in time. I mean, there's some guys on the board. Malik Elzy, we didn't even mention him. Like, there's a lot of receivers on the board. The key now, however, is they're going to have to close. And when you have a bigger class, it can make it a little easier to close, because you don't have to prioritize quite as much. When you're only bringing in 2 guys, there's like, okay, we can't take that second guy because we got to really make sure we're waiting on such and such. If they're only able to bring in 2 receivers, and let's say you get a Braylon James or a Rodney Gallagher, you can't then all of a sudden take Jaden Greathouse because you're waiting on Cardinal Tate.
Sure.
I mean, that's just because you're not going to take him knowing you can't get Cardinal Tate. Now, however, because you're 3 to 4, you can get those guys and still keep saying, hey, Cardinal, dude, you have a spot no matter what, right? Like, we told you, we're going to bring in at least 3 receivers. We need, that kind of thing. And so I think that's something that adds to this as well.
Yeah, I think that gives you options, right? Because it's a bigger class. I mean, the class in general, like you're saying, 25 plus, there's going to be options on the board. And then if Notre Dame is, happy with where the wide receiver recruiting is, and they do land a Ronan Hannafin again, his position flexibility also gives you options. I think giving yourself, and I've always been a big fan of put great athletes on the team and let the coaches figure out how to use them.
Like Xavier Watts. Right.
Yes,
you recruited as CJ Prosise. You recruit him as a safety. He ends up moving and starting in 1 year at receiver, then ends up moving another year and he's a 1,000-yard running back. Right. I mean,
an NFL running back.
Right. Matthias Farley starts his career as a wide receiver at Notre Dame. James Onwalu starts his career as a wide receiver at Notre Dame. Kavari Russell's recruited to play running back. All 3 of those guys eventually move and become starters on defense. And, like you said, that's why you recruit football players, especially to a place like Notre Dame, where you can't just kick kids out because, you're on a 1-year scholarship deal and we got a chance to out recruit you, so we're going to take your scholarship away. Notre Dame is going to have a lot more roster continuity than a lot of other teams in most instances, because most kids are going to be smart enough to stay to get their degree. They're not going to leave after their freshman year. Most kids aren't Jordan Johnson. Most kids are at least going to stay to get their degree. Most, not all, most. And so, that's kind of where you put it, is this position is you could get to 5 receivers if one of those guys is running. Like, and what I mean by that is, like, let's say they get, just hypothetically, they get a Gallagher, they get Braylon James, they get, just another good player, Rico Flores, and then, they Ronan Hannafin wants to come, and you're looking at him as a receiver. Let's say you take him. That doesn't mean you can't still bring in Braylon James or Carnell Tate or one of those other guys as the fifth guy, because then you can have that conversation with Ronan, like, okay, the board's falling this way.
Right.
We're going to start you over here, right? Or if he wants to get a shot at receiver, you can still give him a shot at receiver, but then knowing that he can go somewhere else. So there's just a lot of different things that you look at and say, it gives them a lot of flexibility in this class. And again, there's going to be more kids that get offers in 2023, and it's going to make it exciting. But to kind of circle back, that's why Dante Moore is so important. It's going to be a lot easier to land some of those kids. I mean, Jaylen Brown was talking about Dante Moore to Brian Smith in a conversation one time. He's from Miami, and he's talking about some cat from Detroit. You know what I mean? Like, kids know who the studs are at quarterback, and they want to play with those guys because they know, I don't care how good I am, if I don't have a guy that can throw me the ball, you know, and Dante is considered one of the best. So you get him, and this is why I keep saying he is the Pied Piper in this class. You get him, and then all of a sudden it's going to be easier for Carnell Tate. You know, somebody asked, you know, how legitimate is a threat is Tennessee. I think there's a lot of teams that are a threat for Carnell Tate, and maybe even some that aren't on the board now. If Alabama all of a sudden jumps on the board and puts a full court press on Carnell Tate, they're going to be hard to beat for him. I mean, that's just, Carnell is open. I mean, he is open to going anywhere. That's why he went to IMG. He didn't go to IMG so he could make Notre Dame like him more and Ohio State like him more. They already liked him. He went to make himself a better player and to become a national recruit. And, you know, so Notre Dame's going to have to show him that, hey, this is where you want to be. And a big part of that's going to be the quarterback position. And that even makes even Dante more impressive. Now, let's talk about something, Ryan, that I think could then maybe make Dante Moore more attracted to playing at Notre Dame.
Okay.
And that is the offensive line. Because great receivers want to play with great quarterbacks, and great quarterbacks certainly want to have great pass catchers around it. But you know what? Quarterbacks love an elite offensive line. And, you know, that's certainly where you want to be if you're Notre Dame. And that's a place, you know, that's a place to say that's where you can confidently say, you know, this is a place where I think Notre Dame could maybe do some damage over the next couple months, get a couple kids in the class, and then say to Dante, like, hey, man, you know, look what we're building in front of you. Look at our last 2 line classes, right? Look at what we're doing now. You know, we need you to get the pass catchers. We're building the front for you. We're putting the backs together for you. You know, that you're going to have some dudes that can play. And but this is where it starts up here. And there is some really good players on the board for Notre Dame. And let me just say one thing. They don't have a high need of numbers. I think 3 is the minimum, barring now. All these numbers we give you changes depending on if they add transfers or lose kids. So they got 16 offensive linemen on the roster, and only 2 of them are out of eligibility after 2022.
Right.
Okay. So I think that's the thing to look at is right now you can get away with 3. You signed back-to-back 5-man class. You can get away with 3. 4 is the ideal. Yep. When it's that of a smaller number, Ryan, it allows you to, and we've already seen Harry Hiestand. Harry Hiestand's already doing what Harry Hiestand does. I'm going to identify those 5 dudes, and I'm going to go try to get all of them. You know what I mean? And that's kind of what he's doing. And there's 3 dudes at the top of the board, and I'm going to have you talk about all of them. There's 3 guys that clearly, flat out, no question about it, these are the top of the board guys for Notre Dame. It's Samson Okunlola from Massachusetts, Thayer Academy. It's Monroe Freeling from South Carolina, and it's Charles Jagasa from Illinois. Those 3 guys are those are the guys that when Harry got here was like, I want him, and I want him. And he went out and saw him immediately. And it's kind of like, okay, this is what Harry does, right? Like, you know, right away, these are the names on the board. Don't have to worry about calling 25 offensive linemen. Harry's going to get the guys he wants, and he's going to go get them. Now the key is he's got to prove he can still go get them. Sure. That's the next step, Ryan.
Yep. Yeah. And I'm actually working on a piece where I'm going to talk a little bit about offensive line recruiting for Notre Dame and how this class could potentially fit. And it's a great segue because those are three of the first guys that I talk about in the article. And we're talking about Samson Okunlola, who, again, first 5-star recruit, according to 24/7 Sports, in their history from the state of Massachusetts, which I just had an article on Irish Breakdown a few days ago, talked about how Massachusetts has become a big spot for Notre Dame in the 2023 class. And Samson, for me, like, this is the Ronnie Stanley, right? Like, this is a kid where, because I know Ronnie started at right tackle early on in his career, then he moved over to left tackle.
Is there a left tackle? Is there anyone other than Zach Martin that didn't start at right tackle?
Right,
in their
exactly.
career?
It's that transition, man. Like the Mike McGlinchey, the right tackle to left. Like it's just how it goes, you know. And I think
did that. Ronnie did that. I mean,
and that's why it's so that's why it's so exciting under Coach Easton, because again, he's always, I'll get the best 5 on the field, right? High school offensive tackles, I'll make them fit. I'll find who could play inside a guard. I'll find a guy that can play inside and center, and we are going to get the best 5 on the field. And this, for me, Samson Okunlola is where it starts and ends for Notre Dame as far as the top guy on the board. I think he could play 4 different positions on the offensive line, but like he's a blindside protector, right? Like in the ideal world, he is your left tackle. He is the stud. He can play right tackle. That's fine. He is. What's that?
I'm just laughing because like I'm agreeing with everything you're saying, but in my head I'm thinking, yeah, that's true. But he's a lot like Blake Fisher. Like what people often miss when we have this Blake Fisher conversation is when I talk about moving Blake Fisher to guard, it's not that I don't think he can be an elite left tackle. I think he can be. I think Blake Fisher can be elite anything along the offensive line except maybe center because he's just so long. Like you don't necessarily want a 6'6" guy with really long arms playing center. You and I have talked about that a little bit. But like I think Blake Fisher can be a stud at 4 positions on the offensive line. I think this is how he is as well. I think that Samson Okunlola and to a degree Charles Jagasa to me project as if you got like if he comes in and he's one of your 5 best as a freshman, he's not going to move Joe Walt and Blake Fisher off the field.
Right.
He may move somebody a guard off the field though, and then eventually move him out like a Barrett Jones, right? Like that to me is how I see it. Is like that's why I was laughing. It's just like. You say he's an elite left tackle, he's a prototype left tackle. I'm like, yeah, you're right. But
we got a couple good ones already.
No, in that too, but also like, this kid could be a stud anywhere. Sure. And that's the kind of guy you want, Ryan, is that guy that's like, what's his best position, offensive line? No, like what position on the
anywhere
I said what I said. Right. You know what I mean? Like,
and I mean, so from a physical perspective, right? Like this kid is a junior in high school, so coming into his senior year. That is 6'6", 295 pounds. Apparently has a 7'1" wingspan. He's got vines for arms. He's got a body where, I mean, he can handle 320 plus pretty easily, right? Like he can work. He has a power profile. He's a really good athlete. So Brian's right. He could play literally 4 different positions on the offensive line. He could probably play center in a pinch, but again, you don't want that length at center. You just don't want.
Yeah.
But
if you had to, you'd move another guard to center. I mean, that's sure. like if that's just kind of how you'd move Rocco to center or Shrouf to center and put him at guard. But your point is, I don't want to take away from your original point, Ryan. But when you talk about what the prototype left tackle is, it's 6'6", it's long. It's really, really powerful hands, and it's really athletic and bendy, and he's got all those traits. I mean, so to your point, I took away from your point a little bit just because I thought it was just kind of funny, but your point is spot on. Like when you design a prototype left tackle, that's what it is. But then you go to Monroe Freeling and you say the exact same thing about him, and that's what Harry Hiestand has always done. It's like he's just going to recruit the best tackles he can get and then figure out how to put a 5-man group together because it's a whole lot easier to move from outside in than it is to move a guy from inside out when we talk about a skill set. Not moving a guard to tackle if the guard has the tackle. It's more of taking a guy who is a guard as he's playing guard, but we're talking more like the guard body type. It's harder to take that kind of guy and move him to tackle than it is to take a tackle and move him to guard. And Monroe Freeling is he is a pure, long, athletic, bendy. I mean, you and I were watching some basketball film him the other day. and he goes up and dunks. Well, it's like, okay, he's 6'7", he should be able to dunk. But it wasn't like your 6'7" offensive lineman dunk where he's just kind of tall. I mean, he went up and put some – I mean, he put something on it. Like, he turned and, like, caught it and immediately jumped, and it was like, that's an athletic move. That's not just a dude who's 6'7" being able to dunk.
Well, and like you said, light on your feet, right? Like you could tell the guys that are explosive, and Monroe Freeling is explosive. And if you told me, honestly, if Notre Dame was able to land Samson Okunlola and Monroe Freeling, if you told me Monroe Freeling was long-term the left tackle, I'd believe you, man. Because I think that he has maybe the highest upside as a pass protector. This kid is incredibly light on his feet. Yeah, as a pure pass protector, light on his feet, has length. You see, I mean, again, go watch his basketball highlights. The kid is springy, man. Like he is a good athlete. So that starts there at the offensive tackle position. And then you talk about Charles Jagasaw, who, in my opinion, could play tackle, but also
I think he's a right tackle guard. Yes, exactly right.
And he's a massive dude. He is 6'6", 300 plus, and he could be, I mean, he could literally be like Trey Smith size, right? Like he could be 330. He is a big,
and he's about to
massive everywhere.
He's a wrestler. Yeah, actually, him and Okunlola are both wrestlers. Okunlola just won a wrestling tournament this weekend, but Jagasaw is trying to become a state champion in Illinois. Well, you know, Illinois, Iowa, that region, Wisconsin, that's a region, some really good wrestlers, right?
Sure.
He is a really good wrestler, and Iowa's trying to use that to their. I mean, Iowa's trying to get the wrestling coach to recruit him, which tells you about that. But it also talks to you a little bit about his demeanor. And he has, like, to me, I think he's got the length and athleticism of a tackle. But my question, not a concern, my question, and sometimes questions can be positives, is he too physical and too aggressive to be a tackle? That's a positive. That was Quentin Nelson's problem. Quentin Nelson doesn't lack the athleticism or length to play tackle. Quentin Nelson lacked the demeanor to play tackle, because you have to have some patience to you as a tackle, right? And, you know, you compared Samson Okunlola to Ronnie Stanley. I actually think Monroe Freeling is the better comparison to Ronnie Stanley. And the reason I say that is because Ronnie, I guess, I don't watch the NFL, but I guess he became a really good run blocker in the NFL. He was not a great run blocker. He wasn't bad. He just wasn't dominant. I think to me, Samson Okunlola to me is more of like an athletic version of McGlinchey more than he is like a bigger, thicker, athletic version of McGlinchey, because he's not only a better, and I don't even think that's even a fair comparison, because I don't think McGlinchey was ever a great pass blocker. I think Samson could be a really good pass blocker, but what I love about him is he has elite run game potential as well.
Sure.
And to me, that's what truly separates the great ones from the really good ones, is you can do both at a high level. Monroe Freeling is a good run blocker, but an elite potential pass blocker, which reminds me a lot of Ronnie. And he's also a basketball player. Where Samson is more of like a, you know, I'm trying to think, like, you know, who might even be a better comp for him would be a longer, more athletic version of Liam Eichenberg. I think might be a little bit better comp, just because Liam was a really good all around player as well. Samson's is even stronger than Liam was at the same age. And Samson now looks a lot like what Liam looked like as a senior in college, size wise. But the game is similar there. But I love, because you talk about Ronnie Stanley, a guy that, and I think body type wise, Samson looks a lot like Ronnie. Sure. So I get like 6'6", like broad shoulders, long arms, you know, body type wise, he looks like, if they were standing next to each other, Ronnie and Samson would look a lot alike from a dimension standpoint. But when I look at the game, Monroe's game just screams Ronnie Stanley to me. And you know, maybe it's the basketball thing, maybe that's it. But the point is these guys are really good. And that's the 3-man group you have to, you hate to say you have to do it, but like you've got to get at least 2 of those guys, have to. And if you can hit, you know, the inside straight on that trio, that's kind of where you start saying you're going to build something. I mean, as good as last year's class was, this class could end up being even better if they're able to get those 3 guys. And if you're going to only get 2 of them, I think you need Okunlola and one of the other 2 to truly have an elite class. Sure. Otherwise, it's going to look a lot like last year's. We had really good players, but I don't know if none were like elite 5-star type of players right now. Like Billy Shrouth, I gave a 5-star upside grade to. Emil Wagner, I gave a 5-star upside grade to. But those are guys that are going to need time to get there.
Sure.
Lowell is that kind of guy that if you need a dude to come in and play day one, Jagasol is that kind of guy. Physically, they can come in and play the day they step foot on campus. Now, technique-wise and assignment-wise and all that, they may need time. But those are guys that can come in day one and say, hey, if we have to throw that kid out there physically, he's going to be fine, for a freshman.
And I think those guys that can play multiple positions are really fun to think about, because Notre Dame in the near future, at least over the next couple of years, you're going to have Joel, you're going to have Blake Fisher potentially at tackles. So there's going to be potential opportunity to fight for jobs inside, right? Unless Blake eventually does make the move inside, speaking. So having those guys that have some positional flexibility, I think, is huge. And Jagasaw, for me, Jagasaw just tight space type of guy. Like, I think that he could play out in space a little bit, but his best work, I think, is just going forward and dominating people at the point of attack. So he just kind of screams guard to me. And then there's, other guys on the board, but like those are the three.
Right. There's other good players on the board, right?
For sure.
I know you love Sullivan Absher a lot.
I do.
Right?
I do
you
like
watched him
Absher
more than I have. So, we both like Chase Basantis. I mean, he's a top 100 to 150 caliber guy. I mean, Austin Saraveld's he's solid. I mean, there's a kid in state. Trevor Lauk in most years would have an offer by now, in my opinion. He's a 6'6", 295, 300-pound kid that projects inside the guard for me. Big physical mauler type of kid, 4-star caliber player that right now Notre Dame hasn't offered yet because of where they are with some other guys. So it's not a big board, but it's a talented board that goes beyond those three guys as far as top level talent. But we are both of the view that they are just in a little bit of a different stratosphere than some of those other guys.
Yeah, no, for sure. And you mentioned Sullivan Absher is a guy that I really like a ton out of North Carolina. I think he plays a great pad level, and he's got some physicality to him to potentially work both right tackle, inside to guard. Chase Basantis is a tough dude out of New Jersey over Don Bosco Prep. I would like to. I think we should put it out there, Brian, because I saw someone at some point say something about Caden Proctor. I just want to maybe just make a quick note. Caden Proctor does not. Notre Dame is not pushing for him right now. He is not a fit potentially for them as it currently stands. So He is not a guy that should be considered, a big push in Notre Dame's class. And from the sounds of it, maybe I don't know if you would have put more context, but it sounds like Luke Montgomery is also off.
He's out as well. Yeah, I think that's sort of a mutual decision. We put this on. See, if you were a member of the message board, you would have got this a couple days ago.
Right.
Caden Proctor is a kid that Notre Dame really likes as a player, and he's a good young man. It's just not going to fit. I mean, you all know where I'm going with this one, right? Luke Montgomery, it sounds like Notre Dame really liked him as a defensive player. They said, hey, look, we'll recruit you wherever you want to play. I think once Elston left and they really started evaluating him as an offensive lineman, I think when Harry Hiestand came in, I don't think there was that same love for him as an offensive lineman as it was as a defensive lineman. And I think that since other schools had kind of been recruiting, so I think that's one of those ones that's it's sort of like a mutual separation. I think that Luke was going to look at the schools that wanted him longer term as an offensive lineman. Notre Dame was kind of, looking for guys that were just a little bit, because Luke doesn't have a great frame. Like, he doesn't have a great frame. That's why I always felt he was a better defensive lineman. I think he has more of a big end D tackle frame than a guy that's going to be 300 pounds. Plus, then his coach starts talking about he's more of a guard. That's normally not what Coach Hiestand goes for. He has. I mean, don't get me wrong. He's recruited interior guys. Sam Mustipher was a pure interior guy. Tristan Hodge, but usually he wants those other types of players. So I think he is not on Notre Dame's radar. He's going to be committing soon, Luke Montgomery, and Notre Dame is no longer in the mix with him on either side of that. So those two guys are off the board, Ryan. I would say right now, I think the guy they have and especially after I had a conversation with Sean Davis this weekend, who's talked to Charles, I think the guy that they have the best chance of getting first, if they're going to get one of those big three, would be Jagasaw. I don't think he necessarily cares much about the recruiting process. When you talk about Notre Dame fit, he's sort of the Notre Dame lineman that we've seen in the past, where he's like, I don't really care about the recruiting process. I want to find the place I want to go and then focus on my team and my school and all that other kind of stuff. I don't think he really cares about taking all 5 officials and all that kind of, at least not right now. So talking to Sean, there's a feeling that one may get done sooner. And that's not a given he's going to pick Notre Dame, but right now we both feel really good about where Notre Dame stands with him. Like anytime Iowa gets involved with a Western Illinois kid, you get a little bit nervous, especially when he's a wrestler. But I think right now Notre Dame's put themselves in good position. And look, Ryan, you've talked to a lot of these kids. Sean has too. The hiring of Harry Heastand was a needle mover for a lot of kids, just by reputation alone.
Yep. Yeah. No, and I mean, when I talked to Sampson, Coach Heastand had obviously been there very early to see him. As soon as he was, announced back to Notre Dame, he went out to see Monroe Freeling at his high school, play high school basketball. And just so for people, and I know we just talked about, Jagasaw's timeline might be a little sooner for a potential commitment. I would say just so that we're aware of the, because I guess there's an assumed big three in this class, thinking about Freeling, Jagasaw, and Samson Okalola. Okalola is going to take the time into the season he wants to take at least 3 visits during the season to schools. So that's kind of his timeline. He's more of a, end of senior season type of player, right?
And for now, right.
For now, yeah. Right? Unless it escalates, obviously, and he finds obviously the right fit. But for now, that's what he's kind of been telling everybody. Right. Monroe Freeling, on the other hand, is a young man that has told me that he wants to commit before his senior season. So he's more of an end of summer type of commit. So just so we kind of understand what the timelines are looking like for the big three potentially.
Right. And that's kind of okay, right? It gives you a chance to kind of, to work through some boards. Because here's the thing about that. So if Sampson's not in a hurry to commit, then what you do right now is you work on just building that relationship, knowing you have some time before he really starts getting in decision-making mode. So you're able to kind of go through a thing of just relationship building. Reese talks to him, Freeman talks to him, Heastand talks to him. But then if you get a feeling like Freeling, like, you feel like he may be a sooner decider, right? That's what you said, correct? About Freeling? I'll make sure I remember. I say correctly what you said.
Yep. So I would say end of summer for Freeling, end of senior year potentially right now for.
So I think Jagasa is a kid that could be maybe even done in the early spring, like late winter, early spring. Freeling is, like you said, talking more summer, late spring, summer, and Okanlola is more down the road. That allows you to prioritize your recruiting strategy. Hey, right now, Coach Reese and Coach Freeman, I need you guys to help me finish with Charles Jagasa. Once we get him into class, then we're going to turn and set our sights on Monroe Freeling. And then once we get him into class, then we turn our sights on Santos or Sullivan Absher. They may already have one of those guys in the class, right? It's your number 3 guy. But then we turn our sights on Samson Okalola. And I think that actually kind of plays well, where if you have 3 guys who are going to kind of commit in a soon timeline, it can be a little harder to kind of split up your
space it out.
Your timing of, hey, making sure each kid is getting enough of the love to make sure that when he commits, it's committing to you. So I think that's going to play out pretty nicely. And then you never know. I mean, Sampson may speed up his timeline. I mean, Tobias Merriweather was originally talking about not committing until January of after senior year, the All-Star games. He sped up because after he did summer visits, it was like, okay, I don't need to keep playing this game. I know where I want to be. And you never know, but you go through the process now working on their timeline. And if he's a late season guy, then right now you don't need to push for him about committing. It's not even about, you may not even talk a lot about football right now with Sampson since he's not in decision-making mode. And those things benefit you, in my opinion, because honestly, if Sampson was going to make a decision now, I don't think the pick would be Notre Dame. I think it'd be a Georgia, it'd be a Bama and Ohio State. I think it'd be more of one of those teams than it would be Notre Dame. Notre Dame got on him a little bit later than some other schools. I've been told by some people in the area that he kind of grew up a Georgia fan. So although if I were to pick right now, I would say Freeling to Notre Dame. Do you agree with that?
Yes. Yep.
I would say Charles Jagasa to Notre Dame.
Fair.
Those would be the 2. And I would say I'd feel somewhat confident from talking to you and talking to some other sources that I could see Sullivan Absher picking Notre Dame this spring. If I had to pick right now, I would not pick Notre Dame for Samson Okalola. That's going to be one they're going to have to come from behind on. So the fact that he is a down the road guy benefits Notre Dame because I don't think he'd pick them right now. If you're the leader for a guy, you want him to decide now. What I mean? But when you're not the leader for a guy, and in this instance, they're not the leader for him, they're in the lead group, But like I said, if he picked today and he's not going to, I don't think the pick would be Notre Dame. Personally, I think it'd be Ohio State or Georgia would be the two I would say, or the two that concern me the most when it comes to and once Bama hires an O-line coach and gets him settled in, they're going to become a player as well. That's just my 2 cents on that, Ryan.
Yeah.
So thoughts on that?
No, I would just say that there's some recruits where the longer it takes, the better you feel about it, right? Because it's again, getting on campus, because he was a young man, Sampson speaking, that has not been on campus either yet, right? So that could be a game changer too. Yep. So agree completely. When these players start to see the schools that they're potentially committing to, that's when we're really going to get a real clear designation. Today, not looking great, but again, longer it plays out, the better you kind of feel for Notre Dame's chances on them.
So let's move on to some other positions, Ryan, and a couple that won't take us nearly as long to talk about. And that's running back first, then we'll go to tight end. At running back, Notre Dame has Cedric Irvin. Look, they're definitely going to make a push for Justice Haynes. And if they could get Justin Haynes, they're going to take a second running back in this class. Second running back, however, is not a need in this class. I think what we can expect to see from Notre Dame is push hard for Justice Haynes. I don't see them taking Caden Fegan when push comes to shove and it comes down to decision-making time. Do we have a spot for this kid or not? I don't know if Notre Dame will make that push to get him in the class. I don't think either side of the ball loves him enough, like a Ronan Hannafin, to say we got to bring that kid in. That could change with some things, but right now I think that's kind of where they are on both sides of the ball. So I don't see him as being that second running back. I don't know if they're going to necessarily have a shot with or go full court press on Jaden Lamar, either one of those. I think what you'll see is if you can get Justice Haynes, get Justice Haynes. Other than that, let's monitor how our current roster goes. Let's try to keep all those kids happy and on the team, because then you don't need a second running back. Then if you do lose a guy, somebody gets injured, somebody transfers, then you can look for the transfer portal or look to add a second back down the road. Because running back is one of those positions where every year there's 3 or 4 kids that just kind of come out of nowhere that you're like, oh, wow, that kid's really good. Let's go get that kid. And to me, that's what the plan as of right now. So I think they're happy with Cedric Irvin. If they can get someone better, a more explosive back, a big time back, like a Justice Haynes, I think they'll go for him. But other than that, I think it's going to be more of a wait and see approach. Maybe hit the transfer portal if the right guy jumps in the portal for that depth need, if that need arises. So that's my thoughts on running back. Ryan, do you have anybody that you think that I may be missing on, that they actually do have a chance, they may make a push, a running back that I missed?
And I know we're going to talk about tight end, but I kind of feel the same way about running back that I do about tight end, right? It's like if there's a guy out there that you love, like a Justice Haynes, for instance, like you're going to take him, but I don't think that they're going to panic to get a second guy in the class unless they really love him. You mentioned Caden Fegan. I like Jaden Lamar, but I would agree with you. Right now, I think that they are going to shoot their shot with a guy like a Justice Haynes, and I think that they would be content and they would be good with, if it's just Cedric Irvin Jr., they'll be fine with it. They wouldn't panic. They wouldn't feel like they wouldn't feel like they missed if they didn't get a second running back.
I'm told they like him a lot, and they think he is going to be a much better player than people think he is right now. Because the opportunity that we talked about when we did the film session. They think that when he gets, at least I know some people at Notre Dame that feel that when he gets to a place where he's allowed to be like that every down guy, that his game's going to kind of take off. And that's what they saw about him. So now we'll see if Dylan McCullough feels the same way. I believe he does from what I'm told so far. But, obviously as he gets into more film, that's a position where the board could change. Things could change quite a bit as Dylan McCullough gets in the process. And so if it does, we'll discuss it. As you said, tight end's the same deal. The thing is, they would definitely, I think they missed the boat. When they got Cooper Flanagan, John McNulty kind of stopped recruiting Deuce Robinson and Jackson Howard, which I think is a mistake. Yeah. They were too good, in my opinion, not to keep recruiting. But now that kind of ship has sort of sailed, it's going to be hard for Jared Parker to get back in the mix with them. If they can get that kind of tight end, I think they'll take a second tight end. Other than that, is sort of monitoring the board. I think that there was some talk, according to sources, of potentially bringing George Takis back for a 6th year in 2023 and letting him be the guy. which would have gave them 6 tight ends, and they'd have been perfectly fine, right? 6 to 7 tight ends. Well, now you're in a position where 6 is the ideal number. With Cooper Flanagan, you're at 6 because Mayer leaves, right? You're still going to have Kevin Bauman. You're going to have Mitchell Evans. You're going to have Kane Barong. You're going to have Eli Raridan. You're going to have Holden Stace, and then you're going to have Cooper Flanagan. But if somebody gets hurt again, if Kevin Bauman has another injury, if he transfers, if Mitchell or Kane get hurt again, or they transfer, one of the freshmen get hurt again, they transfer, like any of those kids gets hurt, meaning permanent hurt, like they're just okay, they're not going to play anymore. Or they transfer. Now Notre Dame's getting lower below their target number. So that's why I think you're going to see Jared Parker kind of talk to some kids. We might see some 2023 tight ends visit, and a name that I don't think we'll see and hope we don't see is Mac Markway. He's a good football player, but to me, he is a blocker primarily guy and a short yardage guy, which I view him as a lesser version of Cooper Flanagan, in my opinion. That's how I see Mac Markway. And you do not bring in 2 of those type of players in the same class. You just can't. You have to your point, Ryan, you have to bring in some level of complementary skill set at tight end, which is why like a Deuce Robinson and a Jackson Howard would have been such a great fit with a Cooper Flanagan. But, obviously they chose to go a different route. So I think the board will evolve over time. If a kid pops up that they really like, they would go for him. But I think it would have to be someone that they view as on par or even maybe a little bit ahead of Cooper Flanagan, because they like Cooper Flanagan a lot. I mean, they think he's a really good football player. So I think they view him as more of how I think it's 247 views him as a like number 99 in the country. I think is what 24 Notre Dame views him more like that than the other services and rank him in the 200s. Now they could be right, they could be wrong. That's not what we're arguing here. It's just it's understanding how they view him to understand why the board is being put together the way that it is. And that's the point. So I think running back and tight end, for right now, I barring them being able to get an absolute dude like a Justice Haynes, I think for now, when it comes to 2023 recruits, I don't see them really making a push beyond that, in my opinion, Ryan.
Yeah, no, I don't either. Like I said, I think that if the running back board and the tight end board ended today the way it was, I think Notre Dame would be happy with it, right? Like they would be content with it.
Sure.
What is there a possibility that somebody may, hop onto the board where they maybe it's a Deuce Robinson, like you said, where you played yourself out of that one a little bit, but now with Coach Parker coming in, maybe you take another swing at it and then you get back in the good graces, or it's a running back that kind of comes out of nowhere, bursts onto the scene, whatever it might be, that you do stretch that board to 2 in each side of it. But I think right now, if it's 1, they'd be fine with it. I don't think that they're going again. They're not going to add just to add. You mentioned Markway, who I think brother played at South Carolina, was a pretty solid football player, if I remember correctly. And I agree with you. I think Mac has the makings of a good, solid blocking tight ends. Kind of unrefined pass game weapon, sort of. Not. I don't want to say unrefined. That's not positive. But you're not expecting him to be a high producer in the passing game right away. It's it's just he needs work. But I don't think that you're going to stretch the class for that type of player. I think that you're going to take swings for guys, again, Justice Haynes, Deuce Robinson, like those are the guys
Jackson
that
Howard,
Notre Dame's Jackson Howard. Those are the targets.
And right now they're all long shots. I mean, that's the other thing too, is we talk a lot about Justice Haynes because Notre Dame wants him and they're going to recruit him. And he listens, he talks to him, and there's a chance he'll visit again.
Yep.
But he's always like Georgia. They just won a national title. Yep. And I don't see him leaving the SEC country. I don't. Notre Dame's doing what they should do. They're giving it their best shot, right? But I don't see that, and I think they're realistic to know that. But if they miss on them, like I said, I think they feel comfortable with that. I think they really like the kid they got last year, like Jadarian Price. They like a lot. Now, obviously, Logan Diggs and Audric Estime are younger backs. They really like Cedric Irvin, so I think they're comfortable with where they are. And I think the other thing too is I think Dylan McCullough is going to need some time to get his hands on the current group to say, hey, look, let me coach these kids up for a little bit, evaluate what we have, then we can decide if maybe we need to go make a push. So that's the other thing that I think you could look at, Ryan, and say, when we get out of the spring, if like in May you start seeing Dylan McCullough looking at a lot of different running backs, then that's going to tell us a little something about what maybe he thinks of this class or those type of things. So that's the other thing, is this could all change a little bit. Like, not here and there, once these new coaches on offense get a chance to kind of get their hands on these kids in the spring and really see what they got, they may say, hey, look, you know what? Like, we moved this kid over here and we love our numbers and all these kids have 2 years left and all those other kind of things. I think we're okay. Maybe we don't need that many guys, or maybe we don't need this, or we don't need that, or whatever else the case may be. I think those are situations where, it'll evolve a little bit, but I'm comfortable with the numbers that we provided for people today. And as we saw, there's some really good players on the board when you look
Absolutely.
at it. Before we go, Ryan, we did have a super chat that I wanted to get to. I want to address this from Matt Anderson. Matt, thank you so much for your super chat, because I put this in on your gap closers article with the same thing. Not sure if you've talked about it but basically you said Notre Dame needs 6 5-stars to compete. They've never landed more than 2. How are they going to get 6? I don't remember saying that, Matt. I'm not saying that I didn't, or that I didn't say something along it, like I might have said, like randomly, but I don't really care about the star ranking, so I wouldn't then say they need 6 guys. What I think they need is 6 like stars on their team. I think you need like 2 to 3 like stars on your offense and defense to be a champion. And I think if you look at Bama and Georgia and Clemson and teams like that, that's about where they've been, like 3 to 4 just star players, then a bunch of good players. And so, but to your point, it's also not about in a class. If I ever said that, I'm pretty sure I didn't say that in a class they need 6 5-stars. I mean, for someone who is really like, I don't care about stars, I don't think I would make that kind of statement. And if I made a comment about 6, it would have been referring to the current roster, not in a class. But here's something about the current class. Keon Keeley's a 5-star. Drake Bowen's a 5-star. Rivals has Brennan Vernon in that 5-star category. Now, we don't know if they're going to keep him in that area or not. I won't be shocked at all if Peyton Bowen ends up as a 5-star when it's all said and done. That right there is like 3 to 4 in this class. I feel really good about where Notre Dame is with Dante Moore. That's 5 if they get him, right? I mean, so it's not out of the question that they do end up with 5 if the ranking services hold true to their rankings, which is not a given. But if I said that, either I meant the whole roster or I misspoke. I don't think I would ever say Notre Dame needs 6 5-stars in one class. I don't think I've ever said that. I don't. But I hope that kind of addressed that. Ryan, you have any thoughts on that?
No. I think, like you said, though, I mean, it's possible 6 in the class. I mean, it's obviously not likely. That's a lot in a single class. But like you said, it's about distribution of talent, right? Like it's not about just like one class. We're talking about a cycle by cycle. Like this needs to be a consistent thing, which I think is changing under Coach Freeman. And you mentioned a lot of guys, like the Peyton Bowens that could be in that conversation. I wouldn't be surprised if Justin Rett took a big jump, right, with his right. type of skill set. Maybe not quite to 5-star, but I mean, he could get into the ballpark, I think, with the talent level he has. You mentioned Dante Moore. You're in a conversation with Samson Okololo, who's they're not in the best position with right now. That could change, and he's a 5-star by 247. So there's a lot of options, and there's a lot of talent that Notre Dame fans should be very excited about for 2023. A lot of great players on the board right now.
No doubt. So I want to make that clear. And I want to point out too that like in the last 3 years, Bama's only got to 6 in a class once. They only signed like 3 composite 5-stars last year. They only signed 4 in 2020. One of them has already transferred. That would be Drew Sanders. They only signed 6, I think, in 2021, which is a very high number. Let me see here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 7 in 2021, but one of them is already transferred. Kamar Wheaton. So pretty sure I didn't say that, but I would definitely say that if, again, what I care about when it comes to 5-stars is I don't care about what your recruiting rank was. I care what you were in college. Do I take points away from how good Will Fuller was because he was only a 4-star top 200 guy? Do I take points away from Isaiah Foskey, who plays like a 5-star because he wasn't ranked in the top 200? I don't care. I don't care where you're ranked. Jeremiah Wusu-Koromo was a 3-star recruit. He was a 5-star college football player. I do think you need 6 stars on your team to really be a championship caliber football team. And I think you could easily get to that with most of the recent title teams. Georgia, I think, could be a little bit more debatable because some of their stars were banged up or injured, so they didn't necessarily play like that. Like George Pickens is a 5-star talent, but he wasn't a 5-star last year because he was never healthy, right? Is that, you know what I mean? Like Jordan Davis, Nakobe Dean,
Adam Anderson didn't play down the stretch with his legal issue.
Right.
Yeah.
He would have been another guy. You watched Darian Kendrick. Would you count him as a 5-star talent? I mean, I think what made Georgia so good is top to bottom. They were just really good everywhere. But James Cook plays like a 5-star sometimes. Like when James Cook is on, he plays like a 5-star. Brock Bowers, that's the other one. He played like a 5-star, the tight end. But they didn't have that many either. They benefited from it being a down year in college football, which I said before the season. They benefit from like 3 of Alabama's 5-stars not playing in that game or getting hurt in the first half. That helped too. So I think when you look at like LSU, I mean, I wouldn't call it more than 5 or 6 5-stars on a team, right? I mean, they had Joe Burrow, they had Jamar Chase, they had Justin Jefferson, they had Derek Stingley, they had like maybe one other guy on defense. You could maybe throw Clyde Edwards-Helaire in there. I think he was more of a system fit than he was a 5-star player. Clemson in 2018, Trevor, Etienne, Justin Ross, T. Higgins, Isaiah. I mean, that one was probably the most 5-star ridden team. You get to Dexter Lawrence. I mean, that D-line alone. That D-line alone had 3 5-stars. And again, we're talking about college football players. Then Isaiah Simmons, AJ Terrell, to your point, and Trayvon Mullen was no bum.
He's a good player.
He's not a 5-star, but he was a really good player. Hunter Renfrow, really good football player. But, Justin Ross was a 5-star that year. He played like one. T played like a 5-star that year. You and I will disagree on that, right? We've discussed that. I think you'd probably put T a little bit below that, but I think he was a 5-star college football player. And then Travis Etienne and Trevor Lawrence, right, were that guy. But that was about as much as you're going to see. Again, like just true 5-star players on one team. So that, Matt, I think would be a more realistic conversation. I'm pretty sure that I never said, unless it was a misspeaking about saying they need 6 5-stars in a class. Colin Park says Terrace Marshall is also a 5-star in LSU. Again, we're not talking about recruiting rankings. I don't think Terrace Marshall was a 5-star player. He's pretty good.
Good player. Yeah,
but I don't think he was a 5. I mean, 5-star to me is like top 20. You're one of the 25 best players in college football caliber, that kind of thing, right? Like if you're ranked 40th, that's an early second-round pick. I don't think that makes you elite. And that would be your argument for T. Higgins not being a 5-star because he was drafted in the 30s, right? I just think T was a really good player. So I think that would be that. I don't, Ryan, you can disagree with me if you'd like. Do you think that Terrace Marshall was a 5-star kid? Again, we're talking about the 2019 team. We're not talking about like Terrace maybe became one in 2020. We're talking about on that team at that time as far as where they are in their production and their development as players.
So 2019, Terrace Marshall, before he got injured mid-season, he was leading college football in touchdown catches when he got injured.
In 2020? Talking about in 2020, he was
no 2019 on that really good team. He was actually leading college football in touchdown catches when he got hurt. I think he was trending towards getting to that consistency, but then the injury I think derailed him a little bit towards the stretch. So I would agree there. 2020 he took a big step forward. I still don't know if I would calculate him as a 5-star impact dude because I mean he was really good, but like again, was he one of the top 2 or 3 wide receivers in college football that year? I'm not sure about that, man. Like it's just close.
Yeah, I think if you're like in that top 5 category. And I think, I think to me, you'd be in that conversation. So I just wanted to, and I'm trying to think where Terrace was taken in the second round, 59th overall pick. I think that's a fair assessment of where he was. He was like a top 50-ish kind of player in the country last year. I don't know if I'd put him in that like top group of players. And that's where we're coming from. So I just wanted to answer that question before we got going, Ryan. And we'll be back tomorrow. Tomorrow we'll have more of a team conversation. We're gonna on Wednesday we're gonna get together and we're gonna talk about the defensive version of this, and we'll kind of get into that. And then of course Wednesday night we're gonna start diving into the wide receiver board for Notre Dame. So that will be our Wednesday night film session. And then at some point in time this week we haven't decided which day that's going to be, whether it's going to be Tuesday or Thursday. Ryan, Sean, and I are going to get together, and we're going to have a conversation about just looking at just the nation. Where does Notre Dame really need to emphasize recruiting, and what regions of the country do they need to focus? What's the base? What are the areas that need to be sort of that away from home base, or areas where you're never going to be the dominant program, but you always need to have an impact there? And what are some areas where you're not doing well now that need to be more impactful? Because Notre Dame does this. That's why Notre Dame has ramped up St. Louis recruiting in the last 4 or 5 years, because they see St. Louis is starting to produce more and more players. The private schools in St. Louis are starting to produce more players, which is, from where they got Kyron Williams. But there's just more kids that fit the Notre Dame profile off the field as well. There's more Tyson Fords. There's more Kyron Williams. There's more players like that coming out of Missouri, out of St. Louis area. So they've clearly going into there more. So we'll kind of dive into that conversation and discuss all those things. So I don't know if that'll be tomorrow or Thursday, probably Thursday. I have to get with Sean and Ryan and see what their schedules are. But moral of the story, got a lot of recruiting stuff coming for you this week. So I know that makes Ryan happy. So we're going to have a lot to talk about this week. Make sure you stay locked into irishbreakdown.com. Hit the like button, subscribe, hit that notification bell, and share our podcast. Get on the message board. We got tons of conversation about this. You'd have already known there was a lot more scoop than even we discussed today in my intel piece. I think what was that, Friday night, Ryan? I put that up, I think is what it was.
Yes. Yep.
So you would have seen that, a lot going on. So boards at irishbreakdown.com. If you're listening via podcast, give us a 5-star review. Check out our Built Bar deal, 10% off your entire purchase. If you sign up for the message board as a monthly member, you get a 10% off your entire merch store purchase, your next merch store purchase. If you sign up for an annual membership, you get 20% off your merch store. So you get cool stuff like this. You get cool stuff like the flags that we both have hanging in our backgrounds. Ryan, I just noticed you're not actually wearing a hat today. I don't know if I've ever seen you.
I got a haircut, man.
On a podcast, not with a hat on. That's pretty awesome. That's pretty awesome. So check out the merch store. And if you sign up, like I said, you get that discount. So thanks, everybody, for being with us today. Hit that like, hit that subscribe, hit the notification bell, share this podcast, get on the boards with us, check out irishbreakdown.com, check out that must-gets article that I have on irishbreakdown.com. Be curious to hear some people's feedback and thoughts on that. And so for Ryan, I'm Brian. Everybody have a great rest of your day, and thank you for joining us on the Irish Breakdown Podcast.